Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me tonight and joining me on the one day a week that I actually put makeup on. So tonight I am going to be digging into my trek, well, one of my treks in Laos, where I ended up getting lost 3 times in the jungle along with a whole bunch of other things. So it's going to be a bit of a story, and I'm sure you'll have thoughts on it. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, let me know. Just pop them down into the comments below. So, where I am, I had just traveled from Thailand. We went into Laos. I had met a girl named Sophie. We had met in Myanmar, and we had spent most of the time in Myanmar together, traveling around. And we decided to do Laos together, and we wanted to do another trek. We had 2 multi-day treks under our belts already. We did 2 of them in Myanmar, and so we thought, there's such beautiful places in Laos, and they're known for hiking, so let's give it a whirl. So we went over to Luang Namtha first. So that's a major trekking area. It's up north. So once we crossed over the border, we took a bus and went all the way up there. Now, upon arriving, we basically go around and figure out which companies we want to work with or want to go on a trek with. And there's plenty of them to choose from. One thing we did notice at the very beginning is how much more expensive it was than in Myanmar. It was probably a couple $100 each. But it did come down because the way that they do their treks there is it's based on the number of people that actually go on the trek. So at the beginning it was just me and Sophie, so it was more expensive, much more expensive. And by the time we left on the trek, I think there was 7 or 8 of us total. Now, when we did decide which company to go with and which trek to go with, I was fully upfront of what my fitness level was and basically my abilities and trekking and stuff like that from what I had learned from my previous 2 treks. So I was fully upfront saying, I'm slow, I want to make sure I can do this. I like to take photos. I'm not the fastest person, but I can do it. And they said, yeah, no problem. And it wasn't like there was any lost in translation, because the couple that we were speaking with that was running the business was a couple from New Zealand. So there was no lost in translation there. So I made sure everyone knew what my abilities were. They said that's no problem. There's 2 guides. You have one guide leading it, and then you have another guide who doesn't speak English. He's at the back just making sure everyone's together. I was like, okay, perfect. So we go off, and don't we look so excited and happy here? We were excited for our new adventure, and we basically jumped on the truck and left. So the trek that we decided on was a 3-day trek. The first day was going to be kayaking, and then the next 2 days were going to be jungle trekking up a mountain and then back down the mountain. Sophie, I don't think, had too much experience kayaking. I had some, but not a whole lot. I knew a little bit of paddling and whatnot. So get in there, and the first thing we do is we go to this insane market. So it's a local market. They went to go get food for I guess the first couple days, and this market was unlike any market that I've ever seen. I just put in this one photo because the other photos I have are insane. What they're selling there, and I'm sure anything you could want, you could find it here. So we all had a wander around the market, and then we jumped in the truck. Now, once we got to it was a bit of a drive, probably about 30 to 60 minutes drive to our head of the trail, or head of where we're going to be rafting down to get to the next village. Now, when we get there, they're inflatable rafts, and I had no experience with inflatable rafts. I've only done kayaks in the hard shells. So I was like, okay, well, let's give it a go. We get there, and there's 6 rafts. and we quickly realize, or we're quickly told, that 3 of the rafts have a leak in them. So we're going to have to stop and go throughout the paddle, because we're going to have to continue to fill these up. And I'm like, oh my God. So red flag number 1. And so we're like, okay, I'm still happy-go-lucky and totally we can do this. I thought I picked out one of the rafts that didn't have the leak, but lo and behold, I picked out the one with one of the holes. Now, paddling in an inflatable raft is pretty hard, but having an inflatable raft that's leaking and almost no air in it is impossible. So basically, our lesson to the rafting was paddle front, paddle back. That was the lesson. So we didn't get any information on how to navigate the waters, because these waters were filled with debris. We went through some white water parts. We went through down like a little, it was just like a little mini like fall that had tons of rocks and tree stumps and everything in it. We weren't told anything on how to navigate any of these waters. Then we were given our helmets, life jackets. Life jackets fit, helmets did not. They were just basically falling down on your head because they were too loose. So another red flag. And from there, we got on the boats, and we were able to raft down. During the first paddle, first little bit, we were good, and giggling and just having the adventure. And then we went down the first little downhill, like little rapid type thing, and yeah, our boat was pretty much empty of air, so it was so hard to paddle around the rocks that were in there that we ended up flipping the boat. And basically the guides just sat at the end going, yeah, get up, get up, get back on the boat. They didn't offer you any help. They just told you to get up and get in the boat again. And I think me and Sophie just looked at each other going, what is going on here? So paddled down halfway through there. The day we stopped and had lunch on the side of one of the riverbanks, and we had some time to dry off some of our clothes a little bit on the little fire that they had. This little insect beside me here, he was crawling beside me, and I was like, oh, what's this? And they're like, yeah, don't touch it, it's very poisonous. so yeah, didn't touch it. They laid out lunch for us. So this was lunch, greens and some egg and some tomato stuff. I'm unsure, but I just ate. Oh, and we had rice as well. So just ate and went along, had our little break. We were all, pretty wet. And then we got ready to go back onto the river. Now, it was very pretty, lots to just kind of paddle by and see and everything like that. And from there, me and Sophie basically got stuck on one of the tree stumps that was kind of in the river. We didn't see that it was a tree stump was coming up. So they were, some of them were ahead of us, some were behind us, and basically, we were yelling to the guys that, we're stuck, and they're like, figure it out. Basically left us. Everyone left us. No one waited for us. We were on that tree stump for, probably about 15 minutes trying to wiggle off this tree stump. We didn't know, we really didn't want to put our feet in the water because it was a tree stump, so we didn't know what was in there. So we were trying as our hardest to get off this tree stump. We finally did. I had a lot of colorful language at this point. My happy-go-lucky personality kind of just went out the door at this point because we got stuck on a tree stump, and they're nowhere in sight now. So we start paddling, and we're just like, okay, well, we'll just have to see if they've stopped somewhere. Not too much further down, they had stopped. You saw the yellow rafts. We pulled over to the side, and no one was there. So we were thinking, okay, well, this is where we're going to be staying for the night, and they're probably gone. So at this point, me and Sophie were pretty a a little bit done. And poor Sophie, we were getting out of the rafts and onto the bank. She got off out of the boat first, and it was full of mud, and she took one step and she leveled herself and flipped down right on her back. And this poor little kid, he was trying not to laugh, and so she's like, you can laugh. So we all had to laugh. We found everyone eventually. This is the hut that we stayed in for the night. We were able to find them in the village up top, so we just kind of walked along until we found people. This was us, just happy to be alive. Not thinking about what was going to come the next day. This was the village that we went through, just kind of walking and seeing where we could find other people that were on our trek. This was the house, all of them are these little thatched houses and on stilts. Made a friend. I really wanted to take this baby goat with us in the raft, but unfortunately we couldn't. But he brought us some little happiness for the day. We were cooking. We got our meal cooked on the fire that night, just outside of where we were staying. And while we were having that cooked, all of us were, we changed into dry clothes, and then we were drying our wet clothes by the fire. So it was very interesting. So trying to dry everything each night and going on. This was dinner. So basically rice every night with some greens and a little bit of meat and some vegetables. I don't know what anything really was except for the rice. I just ate and didn't complain. I was eating, so that was good. Other people were complaining, and I was just happy that I wasn't the most pickiest eater around. This was our accommodations. All of us slept in one area. We had sleeping bags, and this was the mosquito netting, so you basically crawled into like a little tunnel of mosquito netting, and that's where we slept for the night. You didn't want to think of what may have crawled in because there's so many holes in the room. This was us getting up the next day. Again, also on this trek, this is where squat toilets come in, or just peeing in the wilderness. No Western toilets anywhere to be found. So getting up in the morning and just packing everything up. This is me ready for the day. That black bag on the back is my sleeping bag, which was absolutely horrible to carry because they didn't bring stuff to attach it to our bags properly, so it was just swaying the whole time, which is terrible for trekking. But it was beautiful views. I watched this lady basically bail out the canoes down the bottom, not thinking that those were the canoe that we were going to be riding in those canoes, but we ended up riding in those canoes. We had to cross the river as the trailhead is on the other side. And off we went. So precariously got in the rafts, didn't move around much so they didn't tip, and off we went. Now this is the start of it. Basically everything's green and lush in Laos. It's really, really lush place to trek. I did not want to think about anything that was in those bushes, and I made it a point that anything that made noise in the bushes was always a bird, and I didn't go looking where I didn't want to see anything. This was the view after the first little hill, which I say is little because what we went up the next while is absolutely way more difficult. And at this point I was dead. It was now hot out, and it was extremely just tiring. Then you're walking through really tall trees and plants and wildlife, and basically just complete jungle trekking. I had no idea what to expect on this, which is probably good. And this is the type of stuff that we did. Beautiful views, we saw everything. At this point, I was not having the best time. I was probably welling up in tears a lot of the time. Sophie couldn't even look at me because then I would just start streaming tears because this trek was extremely difficult. Now, there is a point in each, there was 3 different points throughout this whole trek that I kept up with most of them for the most of the whole time, but there was times where it was just really steep, or I was just slower in certain areas, and they didn't even know I was not behind them, or they just left without me. So basically, when you're in the jungle, you're having trails like this, and in a jungle, a trail doesn't look like a trail. These are my two side-by-side photos. One here, let's have a happy photo, and then how I actually really felt. It was just a really tiring and struggle of a trek. And from here, there was 2 times that they lost me. So basically, I had lost them, and they hadn't gone too far much ahead of me, but because of the jungle being so dense, you lose them very quickly. And when you go to look to see which way they went, because if you're looking around and not, really seeing the person in front of you, you have no idea where they are. So the first time I started freaking out, because there was supposed to be a dude behind me that was part of the trek, and he was nowhere to be found. And so I did what any person that has been taught how to survive in the wilderness does. I basically just stood there and I started screaming. I'm lost. Someone come find me. Help. I started screaming help all the time. It was very scary because I didn't know where they were and I didn't know how to get out of there. So finally, the dude that was supposed to be behind me finally arrived. He was, just checking out the forest. I don't know what he was doing, but he finally arrived and he was like, yeah, what? And so I was pissed at this time, and then caught up with them again, and happened a second time. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I basically did the exact same thing again. I started screaming. I started yelling help. The dude behind me was again nowhere to be found. And I was just like, I cannot believe this is happening. The tears are welling up in my eyes. And finally, the dude came around the corner carrying a load of bamboo. So he was like basically harvesting bamboo to take back to his village on this trek. So again, he was like, what? It's just this way. And I was like, oh my God. So from there, caught up to the group again. And at this point, I'm getting really ticked at everybody. There are certain points, that we're able to see different things. We stopped for lunch, and I was just trying to hold it together because I really didn't want to be that miserable complainer person on the trek to bring everyone down. So I just kind of kept my mouth shut. Had lunch, again, sat down in the forest or jungle, and had rice and veggies and greens and stuff like that. I have no idea what it was, but happy to eat. And then off again we went. So from here, again, these are the trails. So this is what it looks like. So how you know which way to go is beyond me. That's why we have guides. And that's why you should be keeping the group together. And then this was at the top. So there was a third time just before the top where they lost me again. And again, I was screaming for help and screaming that I'm lost. And the guide came down and found me, and he was like so pissed off at me. He was like, it's just up here. Like, how am I supposed to know it's just up here? I didn't even know we were close. And so he was annoyed with me. He made jokes about me the whole time, which didn't help. I just kind of brushed it off. And so I got up here, and this is what everyone looked like. When I came up, they all clapped, and I basically wanted to say, screw you, screw you, screw you, screw you, screw you, screw you. Because I think I was more hurt that not one single person actually spoke up for me and said, hey, where's Jen? First of all, where's Jen? Or maybe we should slow down so everyone can keep up, or anything like that. No one. It was like everyone was out for their own selves. I don't know if it was just a survival thing where everyone's just trying to survive, but it really was the major downfall for me. Now, from here, this was me, putting on a happy face. And the views were beautiful, but at this point I just couldn't appreciate it because I was just not happy. I was just run down. Now, in our camp, we stayed in this tiny little rustic cabin, and horrible beds. Since I was the last one to arrive, I was the last one to get my bed. And as I went in to put my stuff down where my bed was, I noticed my bed, and the only bed left was the only bed without a mosquito net. So that just added to like a 1-2 punch to me of what was going on. And so that night I didn't say anything until I actually went to bed and was, beside Sophie. So we went out, had dinner, dried our clothes. This was our dinner by candlelight, obviously because there's no electricity. And then we got up in the morning. Basically, I did cry myself to sleep that night because I just couldn't believe where I was and how everything just kind of kept happening to me. So shook it off, had a sleep, and then got up the next morning for sunrise. And sunrise was beautiful, just gorgeous vistas and views. And then it was time to go downhill, and the downhill portion was just as crap. It really was. Downhill is just as bad. We had bamboo sticks. They'd cut off bamboo sticks for us to help us downhill since it's quite slippery in the morning dew. And we were able to get down, trek enough, and finally one person said about a third of the way down, maybe we should slow down so all of us can keep up. And that made me feel very good about myself at that point because I was feeling pretty crap. And but that didn't last too long because our guide begrudgingly slowed down a little bit so I could keep up. And then through the whole rest of the way down, he made snide comments and remarks about how slow we're going because I couldn't keep up and everything. I finally found my voice a little bit at the end and started calling him out on his crap and just saying, basically, I can hear you, and just kind of putting a little bit of my 2 cents in. But I can't say I ever want to see a jungle again. The jungle was extremely hard. It was probably one of the hardest treks that I've done, and that's saying something. But it was just very difficult, and it was a very abrupt way to come into Laos. Laos still is not one of my favorite places. I don't need to go back here. I know people have very different ways of looking at Laos. Either you love it or you don't. There's not a whole lot of gray areas in Laos, I find, talking to other travelers. But doing this and having this experience really taught me a bunch of things. And I have used those things going forward in all of my travels and all of my life. So basically, I know from doing this, I can do anything. I could trek up that jungle and I can do it. I may cry doing it and I may be slower than everyone else, but I can do it. I also need to be an advocate for myself. I can't, think that someone else is going to speak up for me or rely on other people to speak up for me. I need to speak up and say what's on my mind. And then also along that, say, what's on my mind, no matter what it feels like for other people, because I'm always thinking of how it's going to affect other people. When things are going crap, you just need to do it. And you need to say what you need out of this. And then I also learned that one bad trek is not a definition of what all treks are like. So I had a bad trek. So I had a horrible time. I had a bad guide. These things are going to happen when you're traveling a lot and when you're doing things a lot. It's going to happen. So it's not going to be every scenario. And I proved it because we did another trek, Glutton for Punishment, at the end of our time in Laos. And the guides were amazing. And then finally, this also showed me that what the things that I did not want to do in a trek. So it was a blessing in disguise, and I was able to figure out for future treks what I needed and how I needed to go about a trek. So it was very, as crappy as it was, you know, I learned a lot and I got through it. So that's basically what you need to know. Like, when things go wrong when you travel, you're going to get through it and you're going to be able to come out the other side with a great story. Because if you don't have things go wrong on any of your travels, your stories are just a little humdrum. People want to hear, things that happened and what you did and how you got through it. So that is my Laos trek. Not one I ever want to repeat, and I hope it doesn't happen to any of you guys. This is, again, how you're going to find me for everything. And then I also do have a free guide for staying healthy. Thank you for commiserating with me, guys. Again, if you have any questions, comments, anything about travel, or anything you just want to have a little gab about, please feel free to get in contact with me. And I hope to see you guys next week when I talk all about Mongolia. So I hope you have a good night. Talk to you later. Bye, guys.